Paying for priorities. Governor Kathy Hochul laying out her executive budget proposal, what she's focusing on, and how much it's expected to cost. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. This past Wednesday, Governor Hochul detailing her $227 billion spending plan for fiscal year 2024. The budget prioritizes public safety, with over $300 million invested in gun violence reduction programs. Additionally, $1 billion would be used to transform the state's mental health care system. The budget also addresses affordability, with $225 million earmarked for regional economic development grants.
Our $227 billion budget will include unprecedented investments in areas that will make a positive impact in people's lives, that'll make the New York dream real. And as I said, make it safer, more affordable, more livable. And if making communities safe is our goal, fixing our mental health system is an important part of that. And for people who are struggling with mental illness, severe mental illness, they deserve a system that actually works.
All right, to continue the reactions to the governor's budget address as well as some other big ticket items here at the Capitol, we're pleased to be joined by State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal, representing the 47th District. Senator, thanks so much for giving us some time.
Sure thing. Glad to be here.
So let's first talk about, there's some things, a couple of things I want to talk to you about, but let's start with the budget address, the executive budget address, and your initial thoughts to what you heard during that address the other day.
I thought it was a strong address. I'm glad that the governor is looking at investments, particularly in the areas of housing, the MTA, mental health, indexing the minimum wage. We have some disagreements, but there's a lot I think New Yorkers can support, including Manhattanites and constituents in my district here on the west side.
And of course, one of the big items was tackling gun violence, reducing violent crime across the state, and she laid out quite an extensive plan to do that and quite an investment on the state's part. Is there anything in there that stuck out to you in particular?
Well, certainly programs to curb violence at the community level, gun violence interruption, mental health investments are all very important. And so those are extremely welcome. We still have a gun crisis in this state. There are far too many illegal guns in our communities, and the governor is taking smart steps to invest in getting guns off our street and helping individuals, particularly young people, cope with modern life and avoid getting into these cycles of violence that we see all too often at the local level.
One of the big things I know, especially New York City, is dealing with right now, and that's the influx of migrants and where to house them and the resources to help accomplish that. Are you satisfied that the state is doing enough moving forward to help remedy that situation?
Well, I'm certainly happy to see the support that the state is offering New York City. A number of asylum seekers are in temporary shelter in my district here on the west side of Manhattan. We're very, very pleased to have new New Yorkers, but they need to get work permits so they can start their lives. And I hope the governor joins the Assembly and the Senate in calling on President Biden and Homeland Security to expedite those work permits, which is a federal issue, so that we have these new New Yorkers in our economy contributing and providing for their families as soon as possible.
One of the big things recently, as we shift away from the budget here, you had co-sponsored a bill, the Grieving Families Act, that would have changed how the wrongful death statute stands here in New York State. The governor, at the very last minute, vetoed that bill. A lot of families involved in the mass shooting in Buffalo, the families involved with the Schoharie limousine tragedy, of course, very vocal about that. As the co-sponsor of this bill, what was your initial thought, and where do you go from here? What will your next steps be?
Well, I was very disappointed, but probably not half as frustrated or heartsick at the veto as the many families across New York who are looking to reform this statute, which dates back to 1847, before the Civil War, before the United States Civil Rights Movement, and really puts New York as an outlier. We're one of only 2 states that have such regressive laws around wrongful death. And because our wrongful death statute values a life lost solely based on economic factors, it effectively discriminates against folks who earn less money, the working class, people of color, typically, those who are disabled, women, children. A child who is killed in a wrongful death situation probably is valued at essentially 0. And that's required by New York statutes under our current wrongful death paradigm. So we need to fix it. We're going to reintroduce that bill, I hope soon, and work with the governor and fashioning legislation, hopefully, that she can sign.
As cold as it sounds, the law as it's written, as you kind of explained there, is that when somebody dies in an accident or is killed and the family seeking compensation, that it's the way the law is written now, it's based on that person's, what their potential earning income would have been, correct?
That's exactly right. So there is rampant discrimination based on the language of the statute. It truly does present a bias against people who earn fewer wages, people who are less educated, people of color, stay-at-home moms,
right.
And of course young children, as well as the disabled. So to have lives valued differently under our statutes, I think is inherently discriminatory and frankly something that we've needed to fix for a very long time.
Now, the governor, in an op-ed she had published, wrote about concerns she had and experts she had been speaking with about possibility of insurance premiums rising if, amendment like this were passed. What do you have to say to that?
Well, there isn't evidence of rampant rise in insurance premiums in other states that have similar statutes that we were seeking, for example, Illinois. But also, to put a finer point on it, this shouldn't be about dollars and cents exclusively. It should be about how we view New Yorkers under our wrongful death statute and more broadly under our laws, generally speaking. And that's why we must revisit this legislation as soon as possible and ensure that the discrimination that we've seen in these cases, the Scolari tragedy is just one example. The Buffalo mass shooting is another, where in these wrongful death suits, families will be entitled to virtually nothing given the age and background of many of the victims.
And you say you're going to revisit the legislation. The legislature as it stands right now, the Democrats in control of both houses, you do have that overriding veto power. Is that something that's on the table?
Well, I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope we can fashion a bill, get it to the floor of each house, pass it, and work with the governor. Because I know she supports the intentions of the legislation. She's said as much. We disagree with her on, at this point, the policy to revise it. And we do need to take a much bigger view of this issue. Medical malpractice has to be part of the discussion. And certainly we have to consider people who are adults in the calculation. The governor's proposals as a counteroffer to us on wrongful death didn't include most of the families who were seeking to have this legislation, this statute revised.
We will be following along to see where it goes next. State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
So glad to be here.
Break down New York's proposed budget with a look at some education spending when we come back. Remember, as always, if you have a comment, story idea, let us know. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. Among the top priorities for the governor's proposed budget, of course, is education. The governor explains that new funding will help to reverse damage done to the education system here in the state during the pandemic. $34.5 billion investment in school aid has been proposed. $2.7 billion set aside for that foundation aid formula, and still some other proposals to benefit universal pre-K, transportation, and other programs like BOCES. Now, that $2.7 billion would fully fund the foundation aid formula for the first time in state history.
But also we think about our kids. It may sound cliche, but the key to their future is a good quality education. And we have to prepare the next generation for success. Our kids are still struggling. Our teachers have been through so much. We've lost a lot of teachers. We need to attract them. There's a lot of ideas out there. And I'm committed to ensuring that kids get the high quality education they deserve and that parents have the options that they deserve to meet the needs of their children.
Joining us now with additional insight into how this will impact education across the state is Brian Fessler, Director of Governmental Relations for the New York State School Boards Association. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So let's first talk about what you heard when you listened to the governor lay out her executive budget proposal here when it comes to education, your initial thoughts.
When the budget process rolls out, the thing that we care about the most initially is what we see in terms of education funding. And from that perspective, there's a lot to be excited about. For the first time in 15, almost 16 years, we see an executive budget that fully funds foundation aid. That is the largest school aid category in our state, and it provides the bulk of the funding necessary for school districts to operate, to educate students on a daily basis. So from that initial first pass, there's a lot to be happy about. About $3 billion in new school aid for districts statewide.
Right, and a lot of that will benefit pupil transportation, universal pre-K, so that's got to make a lot of people feel good.
Yeah, there's investments that cover a lot of these areas beyond the normal day-to-day operations. As you mentioned, new investments in pre-kindergarten, continued expansion in that program, some dollars for mental health supports. So yeah, from a funding standpoint, as I said, a lot to be happy about, and it's going to allow school districts, based on their local needs and preferences and their community interest and involvement, to focus those dollars in the areas that they need the most support, or feel that there's the greatest opportunity for growth and improvement and supports for their students.
There is also a proposal that will benefit retirees, 1-year extension on those income waivers. Can you explain a little bit to our viewers exactly what that means and why that's such a good thing?
Sure, and this is kind of a nuanced piece that won't necessarily grab every headline, but I think what we're hearing from school board members in districts across the state, obviously schools and education are not unique to the staffing shortage issue, but there's a provision that allows public retirees, whether from school districts previously or other areas of public employment, who are retired and collecting a pension, they can come back to the school and help out as a teacher. Perhaps they're a retired teacher, or they're a community member who may be interested in serving as a bus driver. But there's a limit to how much they can earn while still serving as a retiree and collecting pension. And this waiver that's been in place for a couple of years really just expands the pool of potential candidates for folks to come back into a school to assist with some of these short-term staffing issues, again, whether it's in the classroom or bus drivers or other professional areas. So it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve every issue, but what we're hearing from our districts is it's a helpful tool, and we're happy to see the governor propose an extension of that.
And we're constantly reporting on shortages, especially when it comes to bus drivers. So if it gets a few more people behind the wheels and eases things up for districts that way, that would be phenomenal. One of the things I know you said, and Bob Schneider, your executive director, said in the statement that he put out, you wanted to hear a little bit more about funding lunches, breakfasts for everybody now that federal pandemic money has run out.
Yeah, there's a lot to be happy about in this budget, but as you know, that's probably the thing that we are most disappointed to see not in there. We are supportive of universal school meals, as you said, breakfast and lunch for all students. That's what we saw during the pandemic. And I think our members, school board members, school district professionals saw the benefits from a student standpoint and from an academic standpoint of those meals. We were hoping upon expiration of the federal waiver allowing for that expired in summer of 2022. We were hoping the state would come in and fill that gap. That's been a priority for us. We were hoping to see it in the executive budget. Unfortunately, it's not in there, but we know we have a lot of legislative support. So we're going to continue to bring forward that message about the importance of those in hopes, fingers crossed, that we see it included in the enacted budget come April 1st.
Right, well, that's just it. We should remind people, too, there's still a lot of negotiating here to go on before the budget is actually finalized. And you would think, you know, you said, Brian, a lot of legislative support there for it, especially given how we see how expensive groceries are right now. And for a lot of these families, it's really tight. And to be able to rely on that for their kids to start that school day and grab that breakfast and lunch, that would just be phenomenal.
That's exactly right. You know, it's not an inexpensive program, and certainly we recognize that. But we think the value and the benefits of that program is more than worth it. And there are a lot of families and students who may be just above the eligibility line for the traditional free and reduced price lunch program that you may be familiar with. But there are also different issues of insecurity. Someone may feel embarrassed, so they may qualify, but if their friend sitting next to them in the cafeteria doesn't have a free and reduced price lunch and they're able to afford their meal, there's levels of embarrassment sometimes, and we want to remove all of that. We want to make sure everyone is healthy and able to access nutritious meals to help support them physically, but then also academically and mentally in the classroom.
Bottom line now, before I let you go, Brian, final thoughts on the budget that the governor has proposed here. You pretty much like what you see.
Yeah, there's a lot to be happy about. Certainly, we're going to push for those areas, including school meals, to be added in. But when we look at the budget, we care most about the funding to support our schools. There's significant positive in there. So we're very happy to see what the governor rolled out earlier this week. And we're looking forward to continued support as part of those negotiations over the next couple months.
Absolutely. Still a little ways to go. Brian Fessler, Governmental Relations Director for the New York State School Boards Association. Thanks so much for your time, Brian. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
And while the governor is making plans to pay for her legislative priorities, not all lawmakers are on board. When we return, we'll hear from some lawmakers who say they want additional clarification from the governor on several key issues. And here's your reminder that if you've got a comment, story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly at Gmail or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. Not all lawmakers, including those from her own party, are on board with the governor's spending plan. Capitol correspondent Amel Talegi explains why they're calling for more clarification, comes to changes to bail reform, and more.
But conflicting language in the law leads to confusion and a lack of accountability for the judges that make their determinations. So let's just simply provide clarity. Let's ensure judges consider factors for serious offenders. And let's leave the law where it is for low-level offenses.
Minority Leader Robert Ort says more clarification and action from the governor is needed to address crime.
The law has been a disaster for justice, and so I think we need more significant changes than I think the governor at least intoned, but that remains to be seen exactly what she's going to do on that.
And when it comes to affordability, the governor says she wants to index minimum wage to inflation. But recently, legislation was introduced to raise the minimum wage to $21.25 and then index to inflation. Speaker Carl Hastie says more conversations about minimum wage are needed.
I'd say the difference is really where's the starting point, or whether you just indexing it currently to inflation, or do you go up a number and then index it.
And lawmakers on both sides of the aisle agree that a $1 billion investment in mental health services is the right choice. Reporting in Albany, Amel Talegi.
thanks to a mail. All right, stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. But remember, if you've got a comment, story idea, please let us know. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or seek us out on Twitter. And finally, from us here on Empire State Weekly, we'll continue to break down how the governor plans to address major issues within the state budget. $18.8 million being proposed to rebuild the state's public sector workforce. The state is currently facing a shortage of more than 12,000 workers, with more than 15% eligible to retire in the next 5 years. Next week, we're going to look into how the state would use that money to remedy the workforce shortage. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. We'll see you back here next week. Remember, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over the great state of New York. Here's our full schedule where you can see us on 10 television stations across the state.